Randy, we saw some very strong earnings there for TSMC, very strong demand as well. Now, you see these supply chain constraints as temporary, but how do you define temporary?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. To define temporary, I would say we're in probably the worst of the constraints now, and actually should be coming off those as we come through the next couple quarters. One piece, we're in the peak season for all the consumer tech demand, so 1 to 2 quarters later, that will ease. The other piece I would say is vaccination rates in Southeast Asia have helped some of the production come up. And so you do see signs of improvement, not out of the woods. We're still facing issues with China power supply, and we still have an issue with capacity tight. It's difficult to get the complete bill of materials, to get all the chips. So there's still a limitation, but I expect in terms of temporary that we should be seeing the worst and start to improve over the next 1 to 2 quarters.
1 to 2 quarters potentially a bit optimistic, though, because this is a sector that's had years of underinvestment, and it takes a very long time to get a new chip plant up and running. So how enduring will this shortage be?
Yeah, I think there's reason for some optimism. One piece in the TSMC results, if you look at automotive, third quarter, it grew just 5% sequential. The reason for that, they've actually ramped up production about 50% this year through first half. That's really implying that they've caught up. Now, I'd say across the board, companies have not caught up. One of the issues is in final assembly and test. Quite a number of packaging facilities went down over the last couple months, and it does take some time to recover that output. But I would say from the prioritization of certain components like auto, that is helping. And you are right, in terms of the peak of shortages, I think we go through that. But our expectation when coming off the peak season, resolving some of these bottlenecks in the packaging and test, those things will help. And that's why we look out at 1 to 2 quarters later, we will start to see some of the production lines coming back up. And I'll kind of point out some areas in the past month, we have seen resolved constraints. Our team's picked up like server, PCs into September, catching up a bit more on fulfillment.
So when you look at the global orders and you look at all of this data from global chip makers, how much of it is real demand and how much of it is industry stockpiling? Because, of course, that could have very different implications once the bottlenecks start to ease, right?
Yeah, and that's what it is. You have two on both sides of fear. Okay, shortage now, but then do we eventually a glut and oversupply? And in a way, and it's both things are happening, there's mismatch. The products are not shipping, and that is leading to some parts building up inventory. So in a way, you're seeing pockets of the supply chain, like memory, they've already indicated a bit of slowing of orders. Now, the key for chips and why I'd say they're still coming off the peak, but still moderate outlook into next year, there's still good silicon drivers. Data center, even if smartphone units are not that strong, just shifting 4G to 5G, that is more capacity, more supply taken up. So that's where I say it still doesn't look like we go from shortage to downturn with some of these content drivers for the chip sector.
We have seen the Biden administration become a bit more active when it comes to helping the industry achieve more transparency in achieving the supply chain constraints, the easing of these constraints. How helpful has this been, and do governments need to do more?
Yeah, for governments, I think the action early in the year, some governments even worked with Taiwan foundries to prioritize automotive chips. And in a way, I think for government, if they get involved very selectively, the one thing I'd say with the big push, try to address the entire supply chain issue by asking for data, it's difficult to solve that complex problem. And I think by the time they get the data 1 to 2 quarters later, supply chain could look a lot different. So I'd say from that, I think they should take a selective approach to resolve the worst of the bottlenecks. Midterm, no, I'd say from bringing back an onshoring capacity, that's where some of this government support, just to get the foot in the ground, and you're seeing that sign. With TSMC now, they announced a fab in Japan, they have it in Europe, they have it in China. The government support does help geographically balance it out. And so that's where I'd say it really helps level the playing field to make it more economical to start up a fab and build up an ecosystem back in some of the markets that want onshore capacity.
Yeah, when you think about these supply chain issues, also the ongoing or increasing tension between China and Taiwan, do you see onshoring, nearshoring becoming much more of a trend as we go forward?
Yeah, I think the trend is there. It's a matter of how much they can do, because at the same time TSMC is moving fabs, they're still adding a lot of capacity, and especially on the advanced node in Taiwan. So that's a risk the supply chain is still going to have, where a lot of advanced capacity will. Now, we'll mitigate some risk, and I think that trend, and that's where it is, that the trend will not reverse. We will see between Samsung, TSMC, they'll continue to put some capacity into other regions. And that's really, it's governments want it, but the customers are starting to request that for supply chain assurance. So it's a trend, but it can only do so much.